Friends, today is Tuesday, the 17th of November. We just celebrated the Eucharist, and to Saint Elizabeth of Hungary, noted for her care for the afflicted and the poor. And our gospel today reflects that as well. One of my favorite gospels, that of Zacchaeus, the tax collector in Jericho, who was described as short in stature. And that was both a physical description of him and also a moral description of him. But grace would get the better of him, and that's why it's such a beautiful and remarkable story. Jesus is traveling to Jerusalem from the north in Galilee, and Jericho is just about 12 miles from Jerusalem, so he's quite close to Jerusalem, where the work of redemption will take place. But Jericho, all of a sudden, becomes an important stop along the way. Yesterday, we met a blind man at just outside of Jericho, and the Lord cures him. And yesterday, in my recorded homily, I spoke about the effect of grace, grace opening our eyes to see the world aright. You know, in a sense, all of us are blind, and we just don't see the world as we should. And grace opens those eyes so we see the world aright. And that grace also breaks through our hard shell of defensiveness so that we also see ourselves. You know, it's one thing to see the world aright, but what about ourselves? We have a kind of a shell around it, a hard shell of defensiveness. But grace can even break through that so that we see ourselves and our sinfulness and to do something about that. We're blind to the fact that we're blind. We're blind. We don't know our sinfulness. We don't know ourselves. We are in denial of all that. But grace breaks through. And thus the man is cured of his physical blindness, but even more importantly, of his spiritual blindness. And today's gospel of Zacchaeus in Jericho builds upon that, and it gives to us a very, very important principle of the spiritual life, a principle that if we understand will really have an enormous effect on our spirituality. And that fact is that moral reform in ourselves, moral reform follows rather than precedes grace. Moral reform follows rather than precedes the gift of grace. Sometimes we think that we have to work for that grace, try to clean up our life and do this and that, and all that is very important. But the important thing is really to receive that grace. It's that grace that helps us to change. And thus moral reform follows rather than precedes grace. This grace will hit us unexpectedly. It's unmerited. It's a surprise usually. And it hits us to the extent that it changes us. And we see that in Zacchaeus. It will change our lives. And the moral life will follow. But to think that we have to earn it, somehow I've got to clean up my life and do this and that, and then grace will just pour out on me. No, that's backwards. That's backwards. Grace will hit us first. Grace is always first. Jesus is always first and takes the initiative with us. And that grace will come, often unbidden and unexpected. And that's the beauty of this story of Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus was a tax collector, a public sinner. And there was nothing really good about him. But he was curious. He was curious about Jesus. And Jesus, in turn, is curious about him and says to him, as Zacchaeus climbs that tree to see Jesus, short of stature, and Jesus says to him, Zacchaeus, come down. Today I must stay at your house. I must stay at your house. Grace coming, hitting him right over the head. And it says that Zacchaeus came down, and he came down quickly and received Jesus with joy. His life changed right then. When we meet the Lord, our life changes, and moral reform takes place. It happens after that grace. And what happened with Zacchaeus? Well, Zacchaeus says that, behold, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor. And Zacchaeus was a rich man. Half of my possessions I will give to the poor. And if I have extorted, defrauded, cheated, stolen from anyone, I will repay them fourfold. How does he put that? I shall repay it 4 times over. And Jesus, recognizing the effect of grace upon him, says, today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is the descendant of Abraham. For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save what was lost. The great mission of Jesus, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring glad tidings to the poor. The effect of grace upon us, followed by moral reform, that important spiritual principle, if we get that principle, just about everything else will fall into place. Hold that thought, and we'll see you tomorrow.